Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have with me Miss Eva Usadi. Hey, Eva.
Hey, how are you, Kimberly?
Good. So nice to have you with us. And I'm excited to talk about what you're doing now because I think the work is so important. But just so people can know you, I'm going to go ahead and just read your bio.
Sure.
So, Eva Usadi has been a psychotherapist for 37 years with a specialty in traumatic stress. She holds a master's degree in existential phenomenological psychology and clinical social work. Eva is certified in EMDR therapy, sensorimotor psychotherapy, and group psychotherapy, as well as having completed 500 hours of yoga teacher training at the Himalayan Institute and 17 years of certification as an equine assisted psychotherapist. Eva is an EMDRIA-approved consultant, a sensorimotor psychotherapy consultant, a contract therapist for FDNY, preferred provider for Doctors Without Borders, and a member of CIC London's Critical Incident and Trauma Support Team for War Correspondents. Eva is the clinical consultant to the New York City Trauma Recovery Network and coordinated work with emergency service workers and physicians during the COVID-19 pandemic. In her private practice and as the founder and executive director of Trauma and Resiliency Resources, Eva specializes in working with first responders and military veterans, as well as civilians, and provide advanced training in PTSD, complex PTSD, and moral injury. Eva has presented at well over 40 conferences and workshops in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe, and is the daughter of a World War II veteran. Well, that is quite a history and quite a whole list of certifications. So I know you're helping a lot of people. So tell us about you, how you started out getting into this field and what, what makes you happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great intro. And yeah, I've come to where I am now through kind of a circuitous route, but I for many years when I was young, I really wanted to work with children and be a psychologist. And so that was kind of in the background for a lot of years, and there were other things that I did in the interim. I got sort of shifted away from psychology and into history in college. And so just kind of broadened my perspective. And then I was confused at the end of college and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my degree. And so I decided to take some time off and I quit. And I went to work for Boeing and I became a machinist, which was quite quite outside of the realm of, the way I was raised and everything that I thought I'd be doing. But it was very valuable for me to have spent all that time in a machine shop because it really helped me connect to the kind of people that I work with now, which is largely men, but not only men, but men and women who have similar backgrounds in many ways. They're hardworking and they're dedicated to what they're doing and they're highly skilled and craftspeople and all of that. And so it really enabled me to become the kind of psychologist and therapist that isn't kind of full of psychobabble because people really don't relate to that. And so I think that partly that background is what enabled me to communicate and connect with so many first responders, especially after 9/11. That was really how I very much became part of the trauma world. I had done many other things before that in terms of being a therapist, but ironically, it was about 6 months before 9/11 that I decided I had missed the trauma work I had done early on. And so I went back and I was in the process of retraining when 9/11 happened. So that's kind of the broad background. But then after 9/11, I joined the Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Team, and I spent about 3 months working with first responders at Ground Zero, fire, police, Secret Service, FBI, National Guard, and I wasn't there every day for 3 months, but I did many shifts there, and then I just started getting a lot of referrals from people that I knew in my neighborhood, mostly fire department. And so, yeah, I've been a contract therapist for FDNY for a long time now, since 9/11. And it was a natural progression from there into working with veterans, even though I had always seen veterans from, throughout my life. And my father served. I have a cousin who was in Vietnam, many people that I know who served in Vietnam. And what happened in a few years after 9/11 is that some of the firefighters and police officers that I was working with started to deploy. And so, it kind of came full circle for me all the way back to my adolescence was spent during the Vietnam War. And so I really felt like there was going to be a lot of need. And somehow I just started making connections. It was a very personal thing, because the fire department after 9/11 had sent some clinicians into firehouses, and some of them, they just weren't able to communicate in a way that the guys, it was mostly guys then, now it's guys and women, were able to, relate to. And for some reason I just, it's partly personality. I think in my field we don't talk about that very much, that there are things that we're good at, things we're not good at. And it's not only training, it's also kind of who we are, what our makeup is and the way we're able to talk to people. And so we find our niche. And I feel like I have definitely found my niche, through the years and into the work that I'm currently doing.
Yeah. And when, I think about some of the people that you're working with, they have been through horrendous things in their lives. They've seen things that people shouldn't see, but they had, and they were there, and they come home and, have nightmares or however else it affects them. I mean, I remember even as a child, we had a friend, and my mom was real good with friends with the wife, but the husband didn't really act quite normally. And so I asked my mom, what's wrong? How come he's acts so funny? She said, oh, he was in the war in Vietnam, and that messed up his brain. And, ever since then I thought, how can being in a war, being in an experience like that affect someone so much that even their personality can change? So what you're doing is so important. And I remember thinking, well, why doesn't someone help him? You know? So when you're working with people, how do you help them get through and get over some of these things that are negatively affecting them in their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are many different ways of working with trauma, and I've selected ways that work for me, because all of the modalities that I'm certified in are ones that I've actually had as a client, because I can't do with a client what hasn't worked for me and what I actually don't feel on the inside. So that's just the way I operate. But one of the key things that I learned right after 9/11, actually, I was one of 400 therapists in New York City who went for an EMDR training. And that completely changed my capacity to actually process something to completion. And what that means is we don't just talk about it, because talking about a trauma can actually sometimes make it worse. But we talk about it in a way while we're keeping the person somatically regulated so that they're in a somewhat safe place inside themselves. And then when we go into the material, they're able to tolerate it in a way that does not become re-traumatization. And it's a fairly extensive process, EMDR. It's not just, a quick fix, but it enables the memory to recede, far into the background so that it's not front and center and it's not creating symptoms,
Mhm.
like sleeplessness, as you mentioned, and nightmares and flashbacks and irritability and depression and all of those kind of things. That's really about nervous system disruption.
Mhm.
The nervous system is completely dysregulated and out of balance. And as we bring that back into balance, it's a simultaneous process of settling the body, relieving the heart where the pain is, and also the memory shift so that it's just not as easily accessible. It's not gone. We don't make memories go away, but they don't create upset in the present, because that's really what trauma is. It's the past is still living in the present. because the person's body doesn't know that it's over. And when we have combat veterans returning from war, they may be home, but their bodies are still in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam. And so until we're able to resolve that for them, and EMDR is one of the ways that I think is incredibly effective at helping really put that to rest so that it's not an active part of the person's daily life. It's something that can be in the past where it should be, because the memory is a memory of a past event or events, and it really is over. But until we can, we can't talk the body out of thinking that they're in danger. We have to actually do some things with the nervous system, and that EMDR has an impact on that.
Just for people who don't know what EMDR is, because I know you've been working with it for years, but some people might not even know what those letters are or what it is.
Good point, and this might even make it more muddied, but what EMDR stands for is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so it initially started with having a person move their eyes back and forth, following fingers or a wand or something back and forth, and that connects. This is a very simple explanation, that it seems to reconnect the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere is where thought and decision making and executive functioning is, and the right hemisphere is really where the emotions live, as that's the seat of the limbic system. And when those two are not in sync, when one is overactivated and the other is not functioning, the thinking part is not functioning, people are really in a state of disruption and a lot of upset. And so as we get that re-regulated through bilateral stimulation, that's what the eye movement really is. And there are other ways to do it now. We do tactile, which is tapping. People can tap on their own knees, or they can tap on, on a part of their body that they feel comfortable tapping on. We also have tactile, these little buzzers that you hold in your hands, and they beep left, right, left, right. And there's also sounds and music that have been re-recorded so that it's right ear, left ear, right ear, left ear. So anything back and forth is calming for the body. And just think about a time when you've been stressed and you take a walk, and then you feel like something has just been alleviated. That's because walking is bilateral.
Mm-hmm.
And all sports are bilateral. Yoga is bilateral. Dancing is bilateral. Moving both parts of the body, even if people are missing parts of their body, the body still internally knows that there's bilateral movement that wants to happen. And so even without limbs, that can still be regulated.
Yeah, because actually, yeah, I was thinking about that just before you said it. Because, some people in compact, they lose a limb or get some paralyzation happening. And I know there's some different techniques that you can do to actually help them be more aware of even a limb that's missing. Like it's almost like they can imagine that it's still there as they're doing the movements and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yoga can be very helpful. I have some colleagues who have developed yoga programs. They've been doing this for a long time with very disabled veterans, and in particular amputees, and they've helped them rebalance, because that's really what happens if somebody loses a limb, is that their balance is completely off, and they have to learn how to rebalance their whole, structure of their body depending on what limb it is. So there are a lot of things that can be helpful for that, and yoga, there. I have a colleague who was doing yoga at Walter Reed Hospital for probably 15 years, working with very disabled veterans.
Wow. And then you also do something with horses. You want to talk about that?
I do. I'd love to. That's my favorite thing. I have been trained as what's called an equine assisted psychotherapist, and we have a new term in the equine industry, which a lot of people have adopted, which really is about psychotherapy incorporating horses. And so it can be both individual and group. In the work that I do with veterans, I work with them as a group, because they train and serve together, and I think they need to heal together. And that's one of the things that people have most commented on in the work that we do in our program. But the work with the horses is phenomenal, because they're for one thing, they're non-judgmental. And what we find with veterans in particular, but also this is true for first responders and some of the other groups, that people have a tendency, we all do this actually, to overly judge ourselves. Usually our judgment of ourselves is much harsher than anybody else's, but we can do real damage to ourselves, especially if that becomes suicidal, which happens for many of the populations I work with. And horses are non-judgmental. They basically give you information in an extremely authentic way, whether you want to hear it or not.
Mhm.
So, the message is very clear and it's usually pretty quick. And I don't mean that they do things abruptly or, in a dangerous way, but they're just very on top of living in the present moment. And that's what a lot of people who are struggling with trauma have to learn how to be back in the present so that they're not living in the past or worried about the future. And so being with these incredibly beautiful, large, and very wise animals can help teach people how to be really there, because when you're not, you get some information from the horse herd. They're much more comfortable when people are being authentic and real, no matter what it is.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter if it's rage or if it's grief, or the emotion doesn't matter as long as it's congruent, because then they can read what's actually going on with this person and they feel safer. Because horses are prey animals. A lot of people don't think about it that way because they're so
Mhm.
large, right? But
Mhm.
they are preyed upon in the wild, and even where they live domestically by other animals, bears and coyotes and different animals, attack horses. And so they have to read their environment, and people are predators. So
Mhm.
when we are in their environment, they really have to read us to make sure that we're safe to be around. And so, helping veterans and whoever the client is to become more authentically wherever they are without judging themselves is really what our work is about. It's about learning to observe without judgment.
Mhm.
And that can translate into anything. Any population can be benefited from that kind of work. And the in our program, while we do have some individual sessions with a veteran and horses, we work with the herd, so it's not one-on-one. And the herd is at liberty, meaning they don't have halters on their heads, they don't have lead lines, there's no instruments of dominance. And so it's really for the group of veterans to figure out a way how to connect with this herd of horses.
Oh,
And
so they're not riding the horses, they're just walking around with the horses.
they are in an arena, they're in an enclosed space, but it's very large. And no, there's no riding.
Uh-huh.
Because when you work with a horse on the ground, you have eye contact for one thing,
Mhm.
right? And the horse has the opportunity to move away if they want to, which personally I think is really important when we're working with another species, that they are not compelled to interact if they don't want to. But walking away is also an interaction. It's not nothing.
Mhm.
It's significant, but yeah, they're completely at liberty. There's no riding. We don't have any instruments of control or domination available to people. And so if the group of warriors wants to go for a walk with the herd of horses, they have to figure out how to do that without, you know, teasing them or without taunting them and without using any instruments.
Mhm.
So it's a whole, it really, it enables people to start thinking. And, we've had so many situations in the arena where you can almost see the light bulb go on in somebody's head. There was one veteran who all he wanted was to go for a walk with one horse.
Mhm.
And so my equine partner and I, we gave him some space to try to figure out how to do that. And his method of doing it was to push the horse, lean into the horse, stand in front of the horse, put his arm around the horse's neck and try to drag a 1,200-pound animal. And all of this resulted in the horse getting even more still and more like really
Stubborn.
again to the ground. I was really getting annoyed. He was getting so frustrated. And my partner said to him, where, what are you trying to do? Where are you trying to move?
Mhm.
And who is it that you're trying to move? And his whole face and his whole composure just changed. And he's like, oh, wow. I think this is why my wife gets really mad at me, because he's pushing, 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 demanding.
Mhm.
And he's like, wow. So he spent the rest of his time that day, that afternoon in the arena, inviting the horse to go with him. And as soon as he backed off and released the pressure and just, they went on their walk together. And that doesn't only happen with individuals, that happens with the whole group. As soon as they start figuring out, we don't want to harm this animal, we don't want to badger them, we don't want to, tease them or make things harder for them. We want it to be mutual. That requires a stepping back and
Mhm.
starting to take a look at what is it that I'm doing here that's creating that. And if I don't want that, then guess what? Maybe I have to do something differently. And that becomes muscle memory. It translates into things changing when people go home with their spouses, with their partners, with their children, in every way.
That's very interesting. And do you find that once people kind of get in sync, that they're all kind of moving together? I mean, they're already, especially if they were in the military, they were trained to work as a team, like you said. So do you see everything kind of like moving in the same direction as they start to sync in those situations, or is it always different?
It's always different. Every program is different. We've been fortunate in that we've been able to use the same herd for the last, I think, 4 programs. Every morning we have group session for 90 minutes at my program. It's a week-long residential approach. And every morning we have a 90-minute group therapy with the horses. And it really varies from group to group. There are some groups that coalesce, there's some groups that fight. They have disagreements, and they're really big disagreements. And it's fascinating to see what happens, because the horses, you know, they watch, they observe everything, even if they're facing away. They've got their ears on people, they're listening, you can see, one of the eyes is looking back. Well, they have bifurcated eyes and ears, so they can see and hear in different directions at the same time.
Mhm.
And so we know that they're paying attention, but as things get a little bit more settled, then they come closer, and everybody notices that, like, oh wow, okay, yeah, something just shifted. What is it? And then we work with them verbally, because we want to be able to process what happened so that it's understood, and it really is, it lands on a deep level. Because what we don't want is for people to leave, and it's sort of like an individual therapy, and this happens for a lot of people, that you go to therapy, you have a good session, and then the next week you're kind of in the same place again, because somehow that what happened was not consolidated in a good way. And so we really try to help people process verbally what the experience just was, in whatever way they need to. And the
Mhm.
benefit is that we have different components in our program, and so there's other places to do that as well. It's not only, the arena is hugely important, but it's 20% of our program.
Mhm.
And that's what I get to do all the time, because I spend my time in the arena with the horses and with my partner. But they have yoga, they have EMDR, they have several other modalities, 2 others that we use during the program. And so they have a lot of ways to process and to consolidate what's happened to them.
Wow. So when you get done at the end of the week, do you have like a exit interview and just ask them what happened for that week for them? And do you have like follow up? Is there any follow up after that?
Oh, absolutely. We do pre and post testing, so that we have clinical data, pre-treatment and after treatment. And the data from the first 9 programs was published by the Journal of Military Medicine. They took our data pretty seriously on the reduction in PTSD and depression, and some other things that we're tracking. And data from subsequent programs is right now being tabulated. So we probably are going to have another piece of updated research. But yeah, we refer people for continued EMDR in their home community. If people want yoga, we help them with local resources. And so we have a lot of people that have worked with veterans who've been through our program after they go home. And yeah, we do follow up. We have what we consider a forever relationship with the people that have been through our program. Anything they need, they can contact us, and we'll do our best. But there's still people from the first couple of programs in 2013 and 2014 that I'm in touch with. And veterans come back when they've completed the program. If they want to, they come back and work with us as support staff, and they basically run the program. And they're sort of the conduit between the new ones coming in and the clinical team. And so they really help make sure that logistically and operationally everything runs smoothly.
Mhm.
But it's a way for them to give back, and a lot of people want to do that.
So when someone finishes that week program, what are some of the things that they talk about that they felt like changed or shifted for them?
Yeah, good question. We do program evaluations, and they don't have to put their name on them. And we go over them very carefully. And so one of the things that came out of actually the second program, a couple of the guys walked up to me and said, we had a big whiteboard with the main schedule, not people's individual appointments, but the main schedule, because we plan everything. We make sure they get where they need to go. And two of the guys came up to me and said, we have some openings in the afternoon. Can we have EMDR twice a day? So we said, yes, you may. And so we went to even more. Now it's 2 hours once a day, but it's the same amount, which is a lot. That's a lot of therapy in 5 days. And one of the things that came out of that program was that a couple of guys also sat me down and said, you need to change what's on your website and what's on your brochure, because you're missing what you've done here is amazing, but you're missing the thing that we think is even more important, which is community. That you've reconnected us with the unit that we used to be in, that we lost. And so now that is very much what we're doing. And honestly, we learned about forming community because that's how horses live. They live in community, they live in the herd for their own survival and the survival of the herd. And so the way that we phrase it is that combat veterans really, when they come home or when they leave the service, they've lost their herd. And so we've reconnected them in a way that some of these relationships that have developed during the program continue. Like one veteran I just spoke to recently who'd been through a program in 2016, and they all come by themselves. Usually, once in a while, we have people that actually know each other, but generally nobody knows anybody. And he met a man at the airport flying to our program, and they had the same tattoo. They had served in the same battalion.
Wow.
Asked to room together. We said no problem, and they are still in touch. And that's been 8 years now. And so, and we have a secret Facebook page, a group where, you have to be an alumni to be able to get in. It's not visible on Facebook, but that's another way for them to communicate. But mostly what's happened is the groups end up sharing contact information before they leave, and they want to stay in touch with each other. And if somebody's in trouble, they take care of it. They're very good at supporting and staying in contact. And especially the ones that have come back to work with us, in some cases, many times, they have a pretty good network. That's where we get most of our referrals, is veterans who've been through the program.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have a marketing or anything. They're just coming in.
And we need marketing. We we do a lot of social media. We connect with a lot. We get referrals from veteran administration hospitals and from military bases and different places. But word of mouth means a lot to these particular populations, because even with the firefighters I worked with after 9/11, nobody would come in to see me unless somebody else told them I was okay. That was just the way it went. And it's the same with veterans. They need to hear from someone that, yeah, this is a good place to go. You need to go do that.
Got it. And so do people come from all over or just your local area?
No, it's national. People come from everywhere. I had a Canadian soldier who wanted to come, and I said, fine, we can't fly you from Canada. We're a nonprofit. We can't do that. But as long as you can get into the States, you're welcome to come. And he ended up not coming, but we've had interest from people because of the equine community and the EMDR community. They're both international. And so I know people in a lot of different places, and I presented in different countries, and people are like, wow, we'd like to bring this program here. Hasn't happened yet, but yeah, so we operate out of facilities in New York State, but people come from all over the country.
So who qualifies for the program, and what kind of issues are they having in their day-to-day life that makes them decide, hey, I need to go to this program?
Yeah, great question. Um, they, I think people who come to us, and we have a screening process. So they find us in a variety of ways, but they come because they really have either not had treatment that's been working for them, or they're stuck someplace. And because we are a suicide prevention program and we're very serious about suicide prevention, requires an active intervention. It's not just about education or teaching people the signs. That's helpful, but it's not enough. So
Mhm.
we actually recruit for veterans who have had suicidal ideation or attempts. And I think it's over 65% of the veterans who come through our program have thought about suicide seriously, and over 25% have had one or multiple attempts in the past. And we've, since 2013, had one reported suicide post-program. And that was 7 years after the program. So I think people come because they're really struggling with not knowing how to live their lives in a happy way. A lot of divorces, a lot of, problems at home because veterans don't tell their family members, partly because they want to protect them. My father was that way. He rarely talked about his experience in the war, but when he did, he really couldn't stop. He had moments, very few, but he would talk for a long time about what happened. But the other thing is that because we identified early on, and this happened actually in our first program was November 2013. Our program's called Warrior Camp, and it's a program of trauma and resiliency resources. First one was November 2013. Before that program was over, we were registered for the next program. And we had the guys obviously were texting people.
Mhm.
And so the next program was in January of 2014. And almost all of the people that came to that program were combat medics. And of the three that weren't medics, one of them was a military chaplain. And so we took a step back and thought something really different is happening here. There's a reason that this is who's gravitating toward a program like this. And we, did some thinking, did some talking, and did some reading, and discovered that really what we were hearing was not just PTSD. We were also hearing about something called moral injury. And moral injury is where people in a situation where they are compelled to follow a particular ethical code. This is my definition. There's a lot of definitions that become a very popular term now, but in 2014, very few people knew about it or were talking about it. But moral injury is really about when people's actions conflict with their moral compass. And in combat zones and combat operations, people routinely have to do things that they would never do at home. They would never do if they didn't absolutely have to. And often it's a life and death situation. And so I think that because we are leaders in the field in this area, that people gravitate toward us because they recognize that that's the missing piece of other work that they've done. And I remember one veteran called me. He was registered for the program. He actually knew a lot about moral injury. He was studying to be a chaplain, military chaplain. And he called me a couple of weeks before the program and he said, I just finished a 7-week inpatient VA program. And I don't know if I still need to come. And I said, yeah, no, I understand. What did you do there? And he gave me some information about what he went through. And then I said, so you talked to me about moral injury when we first spoke. Is that resolved for you? And he was completely silent. And he said, nobody even mentioned it. So he came. And now he's one of our success stories. He's, working for a very high level federal agency and, doing really well. But I think that, we are known for that. And what we do is called moral injury repair because we don't see it as a disorder. It's really the highest level of conscience that people have. And when they feel that they violated that because they had to in uniform because of what was happening, um, we think that this really is a precursor to suicidal ideation. And actually, the U.S. Army chaplaincy agrees with us. They put out a paper a couple of years ago, specifically saying that moral injury is distinct from PTSD and that it likely is fueling the suicide rate among our veterans. And so, as far as we know, we're the only program that actually, only organization that developed a program specifically around moral injury in order to repair it. Of course, we work with PTSD too, but that's actually, in a way, I don't want to say easier, but it's a little more um, targeted kind of treatment. And moral injury is really a wounding to the heart and soul, and that's what one of our chaplains, that's how he said it. He said veterans have wounded souls, and that if we don't touch that, and we don't mean it in a religious sense, really, we're talking about, spiritual, feelings of being dirty and having done wrong, and what I think, and I've done a lot of work on this myself, clinically and in writing, is that moral injury really is about people who had agency. It's not just about something that happens to you, it's about something you did. And that seems to be what haunts veterans. I bumped into an old friend on the street in New York City a few years ago, and he was one of the trainers for my gym. And I knew he served in the Army. We had talked about it a few times. And we ended up having an hour conversation that honestly, I wish I could have taped it. I wish I had just pulled up my phone and said, "Can we tape this?" Because he said, I've been following you on social media. I really like what you're doing. Because for years, my family, he served in the Gulf War. He was an army officer, and he said, "My family, keeps telling me there's something wrong with you. You should go to the VA. You probably have PTSD." And he said, "It never felt right. I don't think I have PTSD." And when you talk about moral injury, and he's watched our videos and he's read some stuff, he said, "That's what's wrong with me. That's what's plaguing me. It's the stuff I did that I don't tell anyone ever, and that I can't get out of my head." And so, and it was a great conversation, and it's those kind of stories that have led us to think that we really are onto something, that this is a missing piece of a lot of trauma therapy. And so I've been doing a bunch of trainings, within the equine community and within the EMDR community in particular, about how to work with this. It's a little bit different than just processing other kind of traumas, which are more about what happened to a person. This is about what somebody did, and I think it needs to be processed in a different way, both in the arena. My partner and I have developed a 5-day protocol for moral injury repair in group in the arena, and we don't know anybody else who's doing that. So it's fascinating, and it's exciting when it lands, and you can see how much it's landing for people when they're like, "Wow." I remember one veteran at an early program. I think it was maybe 2014, 2015. We were talking as a group, and I just explained a little bit about moral injury because they wanted to know. And this one veteran started to cry, and he said, "How come the VA hasn't told us about this? Don't they know?" And I said, "Yeah, they do know, but I think they don't really yet know what to do with it." And now there are some protocols that have come out of VA. They're different than what we're doing, but people are taking it much more seriously as a real thing. And I think for many years they just didn't quite know what to do with what they were hearing. And a lot of clinicians, I have to say, when I started to present on this years ago, clinicians would say, "Oh, we're getting into religion. We're not supposed to do that." And I said, "No, this is not about religion. There's a difference between spirituality and religion. And when people say they feel defiled and they feel like they've sinned, it doesn't have to come from any particular religious tradition. That's kind of a universal feeling that people have sometimes when they've done something that violates their own moral code, and their moral compass."
That is so interesting, and I'd never heard of that before. And, for people who going through life not even knowing that's what it is.
Mhm.
So if people wanted to, they're either themselves or they know someone who would benefit from what you're doing, how do they connect with you or get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We have a website. It's actually being um, being updated, I should say. We're going through a process of updating it, but it's located at trrhelp.org. That's the acronym of Trauma and Resiliency Resources, trrhelp.org. And there's on the blog page, there's several published articles that we've written about moral injury, the distinction between it and PTSD. There's a bunch of videos, and we have a social media presence. So if anybody wants to connect with us on social media, the easiest way is to go to the website and just click on one of the icons, and you'll see our Facebook page and LinkedIn and a couple of other social media platforms. Instagram, we've done a lot of little videos and reels, and people talking and showing some things that the arena is most alluring to people because horses are so beautiful. It's not so much fun to see somebody watching somebody's fingers go back and forth in front of their face. So that those are not, it's not too many videos or clips about that. We have a lot of clips about the horses and yoga, and we work with Native American cultural medicine as well. We have a native healer who comes to every program and has taught people drumming and chanting and what some of these healing practices from that tradition really are, because indigenous peoples have known how to send their young men to war and to welcome them home much better than we do. And so we do sweat lodge at our program. We build the lodge, and the native healer and the veterans do a ceremony where they sweat, and some chanting and things like that. And again, that's not a substitute for religion. We have chaplains who go into the sweat lodge. It's not. The native culture has such a different way of understanding our relationship to the world and to nature, and everything is alive and everything is valuable, and it's really a powerful, powerful practice.
Beautiful. Sounds really beautiful. So I have a personal question for you. What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
That's really an interesting question. I've been pondering it since you told me you might ask me that. There's a lot of things. I think I mentioned I'm a mom, and that has given me a tremendous amount of joy, and really, I think, helped me to learn the difference between what's really important and what's not, right? The decisions and choices that you have to make as a parent, really tend to be grounding and stabilizing, and so I've been very fortunate to have an amazing son that I've raised mostly myself. Really remarkable man now. And we need good men in the world, right? So I feel really excited about that. One of my favorite stories about my son, which I'm sure he'll be very embarrassed to hear this, but I remember when he was 12 or 13, he had a girlfriend, right? They were kind of, connecting, and he had this girl that he really liked. And I overheard him talking to her on the phone. And what I heard was, no, I understand you're upset and I want to hear more about it. Tell me. Wow, for a 13-year-old boy, that was pretty awesome. And he's, continued to be that kind of person. Um, so yeah, that gives me a lot of joy. And I love what I do. He's been bugging me for a while. Like, when are you going to retire? I'm like, I'm not ready to retire. Really figuring some things out, and I have some things to say, and I'm not going anywhere yet. So, I hope that the work that we're doing specifically with moral injury and suicide prevention can become more known, and and that we could be better funded, because we're very limited in what we could do, because we just haven't been able to fundraise to the extent that we need to. So I think that would continue to bring me joy, if this work can expand and more people get it, and then more veterans will have access to it, because they certainly need it. There was something that I read recently about the wars are over. And, well, for a lot of people, they're not over. And we have a program in September. One of the veterans coming to our program he's a Vietnam veteran, and the week after he goes home, he will turn 80. And his war is still raging. And so we're hoping that we will do a really nice job with him, so that he can have, the rest of the years that he has, will be easier and more fulfilling, and that he can, put at rest you know, the things that, and he was very clear with me when we talked. He said, it's exactly what I did. All of my stuff is about what I did. And he told me what it was, which I won't say here, but you know, that's the memory that has plagued him and haunted him for over 60 years. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for sharing your wisdom. And, I hope if anybody needs help in this area to please, contact you so that they can get the help because I just have to say this. If you're a veteran, thank you for your service. We all appreciate your service and what you've done to keep this country free and safe. And you don't deserve to go through life feeling bad in whatever way you're feeling. And so I hope that they come and they find you and they get the help that they need. They deserve it.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. I feel that's very heartfelt from you. I appreciate it. And we do have a program in September that has a couple of openings. So if people are interested, and especially family members, because, you know, often it's the family that gets the veteran into treatment. And that's true with firefighters, it's true with law enforcement across the board. This is not a population that says, oh, yeah, I'm going to go to therapy. Yay. You know, like, no way. And so it's often the family that recognizes and is really struggling seeing what somebody's going through. And it's very difficult to live with, you know, people are struggling like this. And so family members can direct their veteran to our website as well. They can take a look, you know. I've numerous times been on the phone with both the veteran and the spouse or partner, you know, just reassuring them that, yeah, we got this and we can do it. So yeah, that would be another thing for military families and for family members of veterans to take a look. And if you think your veteran might do well, and you asked me about eligibility. I'm sorry, I didn't answer that. Um, our program is specifically for combat veterans, meaning people have served in a combat zone. They have forward deployed. And we don't have any other requirement. We accept people from all branches, all ranks, you know, any level of service. And we also don't turn people away who have bad discharge papers. We accept people who, no matter what their discharge status is. And all wars, you know, we've had, as I said, we've had Vietnam veterans at most programs, not every single one, but most programs through these current, um, you know, involvements, right?
Thank you. So I have one last question before we finish.
Yeah.
What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
That's a really big question. So, you know, I think that to the extent that people can be true to themselves, whatever that means, and follow their own path. You know, a lot of great literature and a lot of, you know, really important writings that we have in the world are about people struggling to find their own path. And that when we stray off of that, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. And so I think that, you know, people need to find their true north. And I remember I had a childhood friend whose father was a lawyer. He was well known, he, you know, very well respected, and came home one night and said to his wife and his family, I'm really miserable. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to sculpt. And it's going to be a huge change in income and all of that. But his family, his wife was really supportive. She said, yeah, go for it. He became a sculptor. And so I think that there, you know, times when you have to take a risk and do what really is in your heart, even though it's not going to bring all the money in, because there's more important things in life. I mean, we all have to eat. I completely appreciate that. We need housing and we need services and all of that. But try not to spend too many years doing something that you hate because it's not, you know, not fair
Mhm.
and it may not be necessary, you know. Just
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
you're
And
welcome.
talk to you again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Kimberly.